All right, thank you for staying with us. We brought you an incredible show on Take 3 thus far, and we did have plans to give you a lot more, but right now something important is happening around the world, and of course News Central will bring that to you. Of course, the UK Prime Minister is addressing Parliament on the middle crisis happening around the world, and we're going to give you all the details in that. But this is where us and the team for Take 3 sign out.
We will continue to update the House in coming days. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken recently about the toll that global events are taking here at home. They come crashing into our lives with ever greater frequency, hitting our economy, driving up prices on the supermarket shelves or at the pump, dividing communities, bringing anxiety and fear. That's why how we operate on the world stage matters so much. Mr. Speaker, we all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. Any UK actions must always have a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. I say again, we were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now. But in the face of Iran's barrage of missiles and drones, we will protect our people in the region and support the collective self-defence of our allies, because that is our duty to the British people. It is the best way to eliminate the urgent threat, to prevent the situation spiralling further, and support a return to diplomacy. It is the best way to protect British interests and British lives. That is what this government is doing, and I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and for the security briefing I received earlier. This is a defining moment for the people of Iran, the wider Middle East, and the world order. I know that hundreds of thousands of British people still in the region, many sheltering from drone attacks, are fearful about making it home. I agree with the Prime Minister that everyone in the region should follow FCDO advice and register their presence with the British Embassy. Can the Prime Minister confirm whether he is making contingency plans for a potential evacuation of UK citizens and what stage the operational planning is at? Let me also, Mr. Speaker, pay tribute to our brave service personnel stationed in British bases in the region. I know that this will be an anxious time for them and their families. They all have our support. Mr. Speaker, we stand in solidarity with our allies, including Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, who, along with others, have been on the receiving end of unprovoked aggression. On Saturday, our allies, the United States and Israel, took targeted action against the Iranian regime, a regime which for decades has been brutally repressing its own citizens, whose leader had the blood of hundreds of thousands of Iranians on his hands and of countless others around the world killed by Iranian proxies. This regime is the world's foremost sponsor of international terrorism. It seeks to annihilate the world's only Jewish state. It has said so repeatedly, and we should take despots at their word. It is a regime whose apparatchiks chant death to Britain. It has attacked British nationals and conducted multiple plots on British soil, as the head of MI5 has warned. It is manufacturing drones en masse for Russia, drones which are raining down on innocent Ukrainians, and it continues to try to develop nuclear weapons in flagrant violation of international agreement, nuclear weapons which, if obtained, would be an existential threat for this country. The outcome of Ayatollah Khamenei's death will, we hope, be a safer Middle East and a safer world, with the future of Iran back in the hands of the Iranian people. But that outcome is not yet guaranteed. On Saturday, our allies in Canada and Australia immediately backed the action taken by America against this despotic regime in Tehran. And I have made it very clear that the Conservative Party also stands behind America taking this necessary action against state-sponsored terror. But over the weekend, statements from the government and the Prime Minister provided no such clarity. It was only last night that the Prime Minister finally told us that the government would allow our allies the use of our own air bases, despite it being obvious that UK interests were under imminent threat. It took Iranian missiles hitting allies in the Gulf before he finally made a decision. And even after that, the Foreign Secretary said this morning that the government has put limits on the actions of our allies operating from our bases. Unbelievably, in his statement today, the Prime Minister still cannot say whether he backs the strikes or not. Today, the President of the United States has taken the extraordinary step of rebuking the Prime Minister publicly, saying he took far too long to grant access. We are told that this dither and delay is because of concerns over international law, but I am afraid that explanation simply does not hold. International law didn't prevent our allies from clearly and unequivocally stating whose side they were on. You don't need international law to say whose side you're on. It has not prevented British governments in the past from supporting strikes which we knew to be right. As the Shadow Attorney General has said, if the doctrines of international law are unable to restrain Iranian terrorism and mass murder, if they tie the hands of democracies while forcing us to stand and watch Iranian atrocities, international law will have failed. It will have become a fundamentally immoral system of law. Why is it that under this Prime Minister, international law always seems to be at odds with our national interest? Why is it that we are giving away, Why is it that we are giving away the Chagos Islands and paying £35 billion for the privilege rather than standing up for our national interest and protecting the crucial military base, which even now our allies are using? We in this House are elected to stand up for Britain's national interest, and where the government is doing the right thing, we will always back them. So let me reiterate our offer that if the government brings forward legislation to fast-track banning the IRGC, we will support them. But let me ask the Prime Minister, what national interest was served by refusing to help our allies for so long, particularly when we so need American support to protect Ukraine's and Europe's security? Are we going to see new UK military capabilities deployed to protect our security partners, our bases, including in Cyprus, and British nationals in the region? And will the Prime Minister ensure the Chancellor uses the Spring Statement tomorrow to set Britain on a clear path to 3% of GDP on defence spending? There is no point wanting action to make the world a safer place, but being too scared to do anything except stand by and watch others. Mr. Speaker, our national interest and national security must be front and centre. The Conservative Party will always work with our allies to make the world a safer place.
Mr. Speaker, she asked about contingency plans for UK nationals, and I can assure her and the House we're working at speed with our partners in the region to take whatever measures we can to make sure that our people can return as safely and as swiftly as possible, and we'll continue to do so. And I'm happy to update her and the House as we roll out those plans. Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. There were two distinct and separate decisions over the weekend. The first decision was whether or not the United Kingdom should join the US-Israel offensive against Iran. We took the decision that we should not. We should not.
Absolutely right.
The second decision was a separate decision and actually a separate request from the US, which was whether we should permit the use of bases for the distinct, specific, defensive purpose of collective self-defence of our allies and to protect British lives, which were put at risk by the actions of Iran on Saturday and Sunday. We took the decision that we should do so. I am clear in my mind that any UK action must always have a lawful basis. It must also always have a viable and thought-through plan. Yes. And it must be in our national interests. Yes. The Leader of the Opposition, I think, is saying she would have joined the initial strikes whether they were lawful or not. I noticed she didn't say the Shadow Attorney General said they would have been lawful, just that the law should be changed. Yes. And I think she said they would have joined the initial strikes without regard to whether they had a plan. She was very critical of us not joining sooner. Therefore, it's impossible to have that position without arguing that we should and we could have joined. I fundamentally disagree. Mr. Speaker, I will tell the House why. Where our military personnel take action, putting their lives at risk, it is our duty, my duty, to ensure they have a lawful basis. Yeah. On Saturday, we deployed UK pilots into the sky in the region, and they've been working there ever since. They deserve to know that their actions are lawful and there is a viable, thought-through plan. And I will not countenance committing our military personnel to action which doesn't have a lawful basis. That is not a fair thing to do to our serving personnel. And no UK Prime Minister has ever committed our personnel to action unless it's got a proper lawful basis.
With this led committee, Dame Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Although the attack on Iran by the US and Israel was ill-advised, ill-judged and illegal, it is absolutely no excuse for the Iranians to recklessly bombard its Gulf neighbours. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, is he in a position to give us more details on what we're doing with our Ukrainian friends to support the collective self-defence of Arab nations against the Iranian Shahid drones that are causing so much damage in Ukraine and now in the Gulf?
Can I thank her for that question, because it is an important question. Ukraine, sadly, has more expertise than anyone in dealing with drones, and that's why we're putting their expertise and our expertise together and using it to help our allies in the region as they struggle with drones as we speak.
Sir Ed David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement for my security briefing. Once again, President Trump has launched a unilateral and unlawful act. Ayatollah Khamenei was a brutal dictator and a monstrous war criminal. He supported Hamas and their October the 7th atrocities, and he massacred thousands of his own people for daring to protest against decades of repression. I shed no tears for him. But instead I think of all the innocent Iranian civilians who have lost their lives. I think of the US service personnel killed in action, our allies and partners in the region who are being outrageously targeted by Iran, and our British bases. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we rightly expect our brave armed forces to protect British citizens around the world in crises like this. But that includes tax exiles like Isabel Oakeshott and washed-up old footballers who mock ordinary people who stay in the UK and pay our taxes here. So as we protect them, does the Prime Minister agree it is only right for tax exiles to start paying taxes to fund our armed forces just like the rest of us do?
Well, can I thank you for his question and agree that the response of Iran has been outrageous, particularly hitting countries which played no part in the strikes on them. We have had extensive discussions with the United States at all levels, including the military-to-military level, continually over the course of the weekend. we deliberately took the decision not to join the offensive strikes that were carried out by the US and Israel. We did take the decision to take defensive action, firstly ourselves on Saturday with putting pilots in the sky, and secondly by allowing the bases to be used for purely defensive reasons. And we clearly set out the legal basis upon which we took the second of those decisions. And in relation to the limits, they are limited to defence, and that is the base upon which we've agreed the basing. And in relation to his last point, I want to be clear that it is my duty, our duty, to protect all UK nationals in the region, and we will endeavour to do everything we can in order to do so.
Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tammanji Singh Desai.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Iranian regime, including its late leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, are of course no friends of our country, but I thank the Prime Minister for clarifying that the UK had no involvement in the Israeli and US strikes on Iran. And indeed, my heartfelt condolences to all those who have sadly lost loved ones in the region thus far. And I'm extremely concerned about the safety of the millions of people in the region, including the thousands of Brits who are living there and currently stranded there. So can the Prime Minister please confirm what steps are being taken to ensure their safety, especially from the one-way attack drones? What steps are being taken to help evacuate those Brits who are stranded and want to come back to the UK? And what steps are being taken with our allies to help de-escalate the situation?
In relation to the protection of our citizens, obviously we're still operating and we will continue operating defensively in the air in the region, taking out the missiles and the drones and the strikes, and we have permitted the US basing specifically for the purpose of taking out Iran's ability to launch the strikes in the first place, and the US has the capability to do that in particular. On the question of our citizens and their desire, understandably, to return home as swiftly and safely as possible, we're doing all that we can, working very closely with our partners in the region, and I would ask all those in the region to register their presence so we can give them the best advice as quickly as possible as to how we can keep them safe and bring them home as quickly as possible.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Well, whilst many of us believe that we should be guided by the law of national self-interest, not so-called international law, does the Prime Minister agree that we are right to be cautious in this matter, that the British public will warmly support him in defending British people and bases, but they're very sceptical about being dragged into the cesspit of Middle East politics? They remember Iraq, which some of us voted against. They remember all the arguments about weapons of mass destruction. What evidence, actually, is there that Iran was on the cusp of acquiring nuclear weapons? And since when has regime change from the skies ever changed the regime?
Let me thank him for his question. This government does not believe in regime change from the skies, and I thank him for his question. The lessons of history have taught us that it is important when we make decisions like this that we establish there is a lawful basis for what the United Kingdom is doing. That is one of the lessons from Iraq. And that there's a viable, thought-through plan with an objective that can be achieved or has a viable prospect of being achieved. That is the principles that I applied to the decisions that I made over the weekend. They're the principles I applied to the decision not to get involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel. They're also the principles I applied separately to the separate decision and a separate request from the US to be able to take defensive action in order to hit the launchers for the missiles that are currently going into allies, countries in the region, and currently threatening our citizens and our service personnel. And I stand by both of those decisions. I repeat, I am not prepared to commit our military service people to action unless I am sure that what they're doing is lawful and has a viable basis. We can discuss what the law is on another occasion, but the law is what it is, and they deserve to know that their Prime Minister cares and pays attention to whether what I'm asking them to do is lawful. And I will always do that.
Diane Abbott, Mother of the House.
The Prime Minister will be aware that very many of our constituents remember the Iraq War. And they will have noted the similarities between this war and the Iraq War, both in the Middle East and both illegal. Of course, this regime, the current regime in Iran, is a horrible regime, violent, murderous, and a threat to international order. But does he accept that our constituents are not prepared to see this country dragged into another war in the nature of the Iraq War?
Can I thank her and assure her that we do need and have learnt the lessons of Iraq, which is why I've been so clear there must be a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. In relation to our nationals, I think everybody and all of our constituents would expect our government to take action to protect British nationals. We have 300 British nationals in the region. They are at risk. We've already seen strikes on hotels and airport hotels where our British nationals have been staying. We've had strikes near military bases within hundreds of yards of our personnel. It's our duty to take the action that we can take and will take to protect them.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Prime Minister has outlined that the Iranians attacked a United Kingdom sovereign base at Akrotiri, why does that not form the basis for legal military action against the Iranians, not just hosting US forces on our bases, but taking direct action at source against the launch of such missiles, as we did in relation to the Iranian proxies, the Houthis, in previous conflicts that he supported? Moreover, given the Iranians' ability to exercise malign influence on the streets of this country, what reassurances can he give the House and the public at large about coordination across our intelligence and security capabilities to address this heightened threat on our streets?
In relation to the second point, can I tell them there is coordination going on for that very reason? As I set out in my statement, there have been 20 Iranian-backed plots to take action on our streets, all of which have been thwarted, and I pay my respect to our security and intelligence services in the work that they do. In relation to the point he makes, there were two separate decisions made over the weekend. We are in the sky taking action defensively on our allies. Among the reasons we agreed to the request from the US yesterday is because they have the capability to take the missile launchers out in Iran, and that is why we gave them the permission to use our bases in order to reduce the threat to our citizens.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has spoken about possibly repatriating British citizens in the region. Can he tell us whether this will be through the MOD, and if so, who will foot the bill? Will it be the MOD, the Treasury, or those who are being repatriated?
We're working across all departments in relation to repatriation, and at the moment we're simply focused on working with our allies to get a plan together to get people out in the first place and to do it as quickly, safely as possible, and there's no intention to charge people for that.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's reaction at the end of last week appeared to many to be both anemic and disappointing, and at variance with the other Five Eye nations. Yeah. Will he read the analysis of the shadow attorney, the noble and learned KC Lord Wolfson, which shows not only that British active engagement and support is within international law, but that those who seek to use international law to constrain us in these circumstances have the effect of leaving tyrants and murderers in place to continue perpetrating their vile deeds with impunity? Excellent.
Mr. Speaker, we obviously coordinate with our Five Eyes partners. We were dealing with a specific request to take action And that was important that we applied the principles that actually have been applied by successive governments, which is to ask the question and get legal advice on the question, is there a lawful basis for what is proposed, and does it have a viable, thought-through plan? It's not a legal question, it's about exposing our military personnel to action that risks their lives, making sure that it is lawful before we ask them to do that. I think that is the duty of the Prime Ministers, and previous Prime Ministers have taken exactly the same approach. I will, of course, read the Shadow Attorney's advice, but I'm very clear in the advice that I received, and I will not commit our military personnel to unlawful action. That is not what they would expect and deserve. They are entitled to better than that.
Donald.
As others have mentioned, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya, I think many of us know the way this goes. And there are responsibilities on all of our shoulders. And the Prime Minister is right, there needs to be a plan. Has the US President shared with him or consulted with him on what the plan is? Because from our experience, we know it's easy for politicians to start the war and fire the weapons. It's when the shooting ends, the nightmare begins.
Yes, exactly.
That's why we need clarity of our role as a country, an independent country, not necessarily swayed even by Donald Trump. And can I say to him, when he stood for the leadership of the Labour Party, he very clearly set out that there would be a vote in this House on any decision about military action. Can I ask him to assure us, so that we don't drift into this war, as we have in the past, that there will be a vote in this House?
Well, can I thank him? And he's right to urge caution. History teaches us that. And that is why it's important not only that there's a lawful basis, but there is a plan that is viable and thought through. And obviously, we've had discussions at all levels with the US in relation to that. In relation to the decision I took yesterday, I'm very clear what the lawful basis is and what the plan in relation to the protection of our nationals is. On the question he raises about a vote, that is, of course, a vote on offensive action, deploying our troops or military, and that is not this situation.
Carmine.
You will recall that in 2003, this House voted to support George Bush's war in Iraq, and that 10 years later then we voted against supporting Barack Obama's intervention in Syria. I believed and still believe that on both occasions we made the wrong decision, but it was of critical importance for the political and even the social cohesion of this country that these should be decisions made in this chamber. Mr. Speaker, the people of the United Kingdom will not support an intervention that does not have a clear objective and a clear plan for post-conflict period. Will the Prime Minister be guided by these principles, and will he ensure that this House is given its place in whatever is handed to us in the weeks and months to come?
Well, of course, this House must hold accountability and debate on this issue. But just in relation to the vote, there is no convention for a vote in relation to defensive action, only offensive action. And nor could there be, realistically. Defensive action has to be taken at very swift notice. On Saturday morning, I had to take the decision to deploy our pilots to the sky in order to defend our UK nationals. There is no way we could have waited for a debate or vote in the House. Equally, last night, I had to take a decision about the deployment and use of base.
Well, that was Prime Minister's questions, where the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is addressing Parliament, urging calm and unity as the Middle East crisis deepens. Just like we said, the UK Prime Minister is addressing the Parliament on the US-Israel-Iran war and what role the UK has played, in all of this as an independent country.